So, back in early April 2026, there was this big news about a potential breakthrough. A ceasefire worked out between the US and Iran. But just as people were starting to hope for a little bit of peace, the border between Israel and Lebanon just exploded. It became one of the deadliest days of the entire conflict. So, how does that even happen? Let's get into it. I mean, it's a question that just doesn't seem to make any sense, right? How can a deal that's designed to stop the fighting actually lead to a massive escalation? That's the huge paradox, the central mystery that we're going to try to unpack here. And believe me, the stakes were incredibly high. This number right here says it all. 254. That's the number of people who were reportedly killed across Lebanon in the attacks on that single day, April 8th. So get this. The ceasefire gets announced on April 8th. And then, just a few hours later, Israel launches its biggest offensive of the war against Hezbollah targets inside Lebanon. A moment that was supposed to be about diplomacy was instantly buried by an explosion of violence.
And the sheer scale of this thing, it's just staggering. According to Israeli defense officials, we're talking about roughly 50 aircraft pulling off around 100 strikes. And all of that happened in just 10 minutes. The targets were all over the place: Beirut, the Bekaa Valley, southern Lebanon. It was the largest coordinated attack since the whole conflict got wider.
So why? Why did this happen? Well, it all boils down to this really fundamental, and as it turns out, fatal disagreement over what the deal actually said. It's like both sides were looking at the very same agreement, but seeing two completely different things. And what's so wild is how clearly this lays out the huge gap between the two sides. On one hand, Iran and its allies, like Hezbollah, were convinced the ceasefire covered everything, including Lebanon. But on the other side, the United States and Israel had a totally different read. They argued the deal was strictly between them and Iran and had nothing to do with Lebanon. It really makes you wonder, was this just a catastrophic miscommunication, or was that ambiguity maybe intentional? This was the official Israeli line, laid out in no uncertain terms by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. From their point of view, their military operations in Lebanon were not breaking any rules. As far as they were concerned, they were just continuing their mission to secure their northern border. Then you have the complete opposite from the Iranian president Masoud Pezeshkian. I mean, for them, a truce in Lebanon wasn't some optional extra. It was, and I'm quoting here, an essential condition for the whole deal. So they saw Israel's attacks as a direct violation, right out of the gate. And then you have the American position, as explained by U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance. The U.S. basically called the whole thing a legitimate misunderstanding, while confirming that their take on it lined up with Israel's. But you have to remember, for the people actually on the ground, the consequences of that so-called misunderstanding were absolutely devastating. So let's step away from the high-level diplomacy for a second. Because beyond all the arguments over the wording of a deal, there's a real and deepening humanitarian crisis happening for the people of Lebanon. According to Lebanon's Ministry of Health, since the fighting really ramped up in early March 2026, more than 1,500 people have been killed. I mean, think about that. That's in just over a month of intense fighting. And it's not just the death toll. The violence has forced over 1 million people from their homes. This has created a massive wave of displacement in a country that was already struggling big time, economically. Okay, so this chart really paints a grim picture of the pressure Lebanon is under. Since the start of March, you've got over 1,500 people killed, over 1 million displaced, and, this is so important, 93 health units have been attacked. That just cripples the country's ability to take care of anyone, wounded or sick. So, you might be asking, what is Israel's goal in all this? What's the military objective? Well, they've been pretty clear about it. Their stated goal is to create a buffer, a security zone, in southern Lebanon. The idea is to push Hezbollah forces away from the border, all the way back to the Litani River, to secure their own northern communities. To really get what's happening here, we have to zoom out a bit, because none of this is happening in a vacuum. The violence we're seeing today is really just the latest brutal chapter in a very long, very cyclical conflict between Israel and Hezbollah. This timeline really helps put it all into perspective. You go back to the 1980s, when Hezbollah was founded during Israel's occupation of Lebanon. From there, you've got these major clashes, like the 2006 war, and then a long, tense quiet that was eventually shattered by all the regional conflicts spilling over, which leads us right up to what we're seeing today. And, the impact of a conflict like this, it goes so much deeper than the immediate tragedy. The economic scars, well, they can last for a very, very long time. Not just for Lebanon, but for the whole region.
And you don't have to take my word for it. The International Monetary Fund, the IMF, put out a report that makes this crystal clear. Their research shows that the economic damage from a war isn't just some short-term blip. It's a deep wound that can stick around for a decade or even more. So what does that economic damage actually look like? Well, the IMF found that wars almost always lead to a lasting drop in production, a currency that just keeps losing value, a drain on financial reserves, and big spikes in inflation. These are problems that don't just go away. They can impact a country for generations.
And that really brings us full circle, right back to that paradox we started with. When a word like ceasefire, a word that's supposed to mean peace, actually becomes the trigger for more war because everyone has a different dictionary, well, it leaves you with a really tough question. Where do you even start to look for a real path to peace?